What's going on, people? Welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be putting the ESCs and the motors on the new build, and we'll probably be doing some soldering tips and techniques. Hang around. Alright everybody, without further delay, let's get into this build right here. So the parts I'm going to be using, as stated before, they're going to be some dated parts, but they're still really great. This right here is the Holy Bro Tico 32 35 amp ESC. It's always really good to know what type of electronics that you're using. Make sure you get a good wiring diagram for everything. I bought a lot of these parts off of my nephew. He was getting out of the hobby, so like I said, they're somewhat dated, but they're still really great parts, and I'm sure this thing's going to fly really well. RC Groups is a great place to get good used parts, don't forget. You may be able to find some of these things. The motors I'm going to be using, which is seen in some other videos in the past, are the Emax LS 2207. These are the 2550 kV. I've had heating issues in the past with these motors. I've took them off quads, put them on different quads, couldn't figure out quite what was going on with them. So I'm gonna give them one last chance with this quad. I think I may have found the issue. It looks like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it show on camera, but some of these wires right here for the stator are touching this bottom mounting bracket right here. I know in the past I've always checked to make sure that none of my screws are coming up in here and touching any part of these stator coils in here, because that would cause major heating issues with your motors. You could burn them up, short it out and burn them up. So I'm going to be adding maybe some heat shrink up in here, try to get it jammed up in there as far as I can, or maybe even some electrical tape, but I'm going to try to see if I can't resolve that. A lot of different parts and stuff need to be removed and desoldered. I'm not going to be using these LEDs. I'll have to lengthen the motor wires, so I'll be showing all that stuff in this video. I'm also going to clean up some of this older solder that's on here. We're going to freshen it up, and I'm going to show you just how to do it in this video. When it comes to speed controllers, today there's 3 different main versions out there. You got the BL-Heli 32, you got the BL-Heli S, and you got the KISS. They're all different but similar in the same aspect. You just need to make extra sure you know which one you're using, what firmware it's running, and I'm going to show you how to set all this stuff up and get it going as the build video progresses along. So first things first, I need to decide how I'm going to put this thing in this quad. This is a really big speed controller, but at the same time, I know it's a really good one. And I've pretty much decided I'm going to mount it like this right here. So it's going to sit in there somewhere like that. It's going to be pancaked in there. I have to get me some power wires. Tools needed for the build. Of course, you're going to need some solder. You're going to need some wire nippers, maybe even some pliers. You're going to need some tweezers. These are really great right here. They have a serrated tip on them so they grip the wire really well. And of course you're going to need a soldering iron. And I recommend getting one that can get, with a big tip, that can get really hot, because whenever you got to solder on these bigger pads right here, you're going to need something with some substantial power. When I start getting into the smaller stuff, I'll be using this TS100. It's a portable solder. It's really great for doing little field repairs and stuff. So I'll be using that for whenever I start getting into the finer soldering of pads. But in this video, I'm not going to be focusing too much on the flight controller. I'm going to do a complete breakdown of this flight controller, the pads, and the labeling in another video. That way you get a really good understanding of flight controllers, and you might can make an educated decision on what flight controller you would like to go with. Like I said, this one's dated, but it's still going to be a really great flight controller, and I know it is. Alright, add a little flux to these pieces right here. Flux helps get the solder moving and flowing. Once you run out of flux, you'll start seeing in your solder, you'll start seeing the solder starts looking real pointy, and it doesn't want to flow as smooth. Flux is your friend. There's different forms of flux. You can get it in the liquid form, no clean, or you can get solder paste flux. I use either one. I like this one better because the tip's broke on this one. You always want to make sure you're working with a clean tip with fresh solder on the end of it. You can use a dampened sponge to clean your tip with. Most of the time I just like using this little wire thing right here. It gets it good and clean. Just run it around in there, rake it around, get your tip good and clean. You always want to work with a clean tip, and you always want to have fresh solder on your tip. You know your solder's good whenever you see it looks real shiny, and it doesn't have that dull look. Got plenty of flux in it. I'm working with a lot of heat here because I want these right here, especially the negative lead on your speed controllers. They usually soak up a lot of heat. It's like a heat sink It goes throughout the whole board. The reason why I started with these right here was to get some heat in the board. Now, pre-tinning of your parts is always crucial before adding any wires to anything. So that's what I've basically done. Was just went through, cleaned up all the solder, freshened it up, put fresh solder in it with flux. Now we're going to prepare a power wire for it. I'm using 14 gauge silicone wire. You don't have to order a whole roll, but I've ordered a whole roll of this stuff off of Amazon. I built so many quads and need it. I just figured I'd go ahead and get a whole roll. It wasn't really expensive. It's always good to have a good pair of helping hands around, especially for whenever you're pre-tinning wires, soldering wires together. It just helps to have these on hand. Give them a little twist. Always want a clean tip. Pre-tin the tip, and pre-tin your wire. Same thing for the ground. You'll notice that it takes a while to heat up the wire, get that solder flowing, and just like that, we've prepared our wires to be attached to the speed controller. Right now, I'm trying to get a general idea of where my power wires are going to be coming out in the top of this frame. They have this nice little notch right in here on the Catalyst Machine Works smooth operator frame to be able to put a grommet right here and run your wires straight up to the top. So now we're going to see how that's going to look. This is a rough idea. I've given myself plenty of extra power wire to deal with later on, and we'll be attaching a XT60 and probably a capacitor to our wires later on in this build. Yes. And just from looking at it, I can see that probably just laying these wires across like so, I can solder them flat down and then turn them up just like this. I'm looking for the negative, black is ground. Get the heat in the board, get the lot of solder moving. I'm gonna just solder it down. So what's happening right here is I don't have near enough heat going into this, and my flux is gone. So how I'm going to fix this is I'm going to turn up my iron just a little bit. It's nice to have a temperature controlled iron, that way you can add more heat if you need it. You have to be really careful though not to add too much heat to some of these solder pads sometimes, because you can lift them. Don't be afraid of these bigger pieces like this. They take a lot of heat. I'm going to add a little flux to it. I'm going to clean my tip really good. And I'm going to add fresh solder to the tip. And because so much heat is going through this wire, I'm going to need something to hang on to this wire with. The ground is always the hardest one. It's the most aggravating. That's why I recommend a bigger soldering iron for these tasks. But now, as you can see, and this is all put together, this will turn and run right up in there just like that. And I'll have my XT60 come up out of the top. Now the red power wire is going to go much smoother. It doesn't require as much heat, so it should connect right up. And there we have it. Power wires are connected. Just like so. I'm not a big fan of this particular speed controller on this particular drone. Because it's so big and we got such limited space in this frame. But it's what I have on hand. I know it's going to work, so I'm happy with it. Now to prepare the motors for the frame. I'm going to set this to the side. So because I've had these motors attached to a drone in the past, and I've had these LEDs on them, I'm going to be removing these. And as I said, I need to lengthen these motor wires so I can get them to the speed controller. and I'm going to show you how to solder two motor wires together, make a good solid connection. That way if you ever buy any used motors or anything, or you cut any motor wires too short and you think you've made a mistake, it's an easy fix. But now I have to get this detached from there. So if you wanted to lengthen motor wire, you could use these things called race wire. I'm not going to be using these in this video, just for the purposes of wanting to show the viewer how easy it is to solder wires together and you'd have a good strong connection. So the Emax motors, they have 18 gauge wire, which is a little bigger motor wire than your normal motors come with. Most of your regular motors, they come with 20 gauge. So it was at this point in this video, I went ahead and removed the Tiny's LEDs from the motors, and I was going to move along with just doing a quick tutorial on how to connect two wires together to extend them and make them longer. And I realized this was the only long piece of 18 gauge wire that I had. I kicked around some ideas. I thought about using the race wire. I had these little pieces right here. That was all I had left, and then maybe doing a little mix match of wires and whatnot. But even still, after mulling it over a little bit, I realized that even after using the race wire and all these little scraps that I've had kicking around, it's just not quite going to be long enough, and it really wasn't what I wanted to do in the first place. So anyway, this is where I'm at in the video. I had went ahead and got the motors attached to, this is like a little brace right here. It picks the motors up just a little bit higher, but I have to go ahead and get them attached to the arms. They're just kind of loosely on there, just a couple bolts holding it together. I had to order some wire because what I have on hand just isn't going to do it. So I'll be waiting on that. But in the meantime, things are prepared and ready for when the wire does get in. All I have to do is lengthen the wire and then attach the arms to the frame and then solder them to the speed controllers. I just don't believe the wire that I have on hand is going to really make it after all these different moves and stuff. Plus I had different ideas for bringing it around, and these are the problems that you run into when you're building a drone. So be prepared for things not to always work out like they're supposed to. You just gotta adapt and overcome. But I appreciate you watching it this far, and when we get the new wire in, we'll keep moving along with the build. Thanks for watching. This is your poor boy. Later.